Welcome to pattern making class. This is Annette Jolie and we are working on our notch collar and our lapel, and please watch the prior videos. So once you have drafted this notch collar, now you can go ahead and pull it off the front of your lapel. There we go. And we're going to take a little piece of paper and we're going to go ahead and fill in that hole. Right here where it goes over 1/4 inch, we just need to fill and blend that little area in. So go ahead and grab some tape. Let's go ahead and tape that down and take your ruler and blend it. Now we've gotten rid of that little divot that you had. This is the draft of your collar. Let's go ahead and cut it out along the outside edge. It doesn't have any seam allowance on it. And it fits nicely back here. This is going to line up here, right into the neckline like that. And remember, this went over 1/4 inch, but that's just to avoid that point. So leave the neckline alone the way that it is on your original draft, but the way that the collar works out, it just blends and takes that little 1/4 inch off there. So now you have your collar draft, and you have your lapel. Let's go ahead and put that lapel over to the side. And we're going to grab some paper. And we're going to start by tracing off your collar. And this being your collar draft, you can decide if this is going to be your under collar or your top collar. I'm going to choose for this to be my under collar. Grab a piece of paper, go ahead and get a grain line on it. I'm going to take some tape and we're going to take your collar, place it down the center back line. Take that down, and now you can go ahead and trace off your collar. And where the tape is, when you're working with that area, you can just peel the tape back, move it to another section, here's a curve line. Let's trace off the curve line. This was the part that sews into the neckline. This sews into the back of our neckline. Right here is the shoulder. Let's make a shoulder notch. Now let's trace off the top edge. And now we have a clean copy of our collar. And this is being the center back, so feel free to go ahead and mark that center back. Here's our shoulder. Right here is where it's going to sew into our notch on our lapel. And let's remove it and add 1/4 inch seam allowance on the top edge, 1/2 inch seam allowance at the center back, 1/4 inch seam allowance in the neckline area. Let's make short lines that go around the curve. And then 1/4 inch here in the notch area. Let's go ahead and curve it and blend. and blend. And a notch for the shoulder. And this being our under collar, that's how we started with our draft. We made it an under collar. You can go ahead and put 2 notches here, 1/2 inch apart here at the center back seam. And then also, if you don't have this type of grid paper, where we started already with the grain line here, you can draw a square off the center back line if you do not have grid paper. If you had grid paper, it's very easy for you to draw a diagonal line. Now, with that diagonal line, you have access to draw your bias. We drew a square based off that back line. We connected the diagonal. Now we have our bias, and we would cut 2 of this collar on bias. So this is going to be a cut to self fabric on bias. And this is your under collar. You have today's date and your name. Also too, we would go ahead and cut interfacing. So you could write cut to interfacing. And that is your under collar. We made it from our draft. Let's go ahead and cut out your under collar. Cut out the center back seam. Cut out the neckline. Now this has all the seam allowance in it because you took the draft and you made the under collar. Has a 1/4 inch everywhere. You have your shoulder notch, your center back notches. This can also choose to be a notch right here where this sews to your lapel. Now you're going to take your under collar, take another piece of paper, and let's go ahead and make sure it is long enough and hopefully wide enough. And we're going to fold it come up with the center back grain line. And now I'm placing the under collar on that grain line with the 1/2 inch seam allowance hanging over the edge. Okay? Now, weight or tape that down and trace off your neckline. The straight part here, which makes the gorge or valley. This is the V in between the lapel and the collar. Now trace off the top. And let's transfer your notches. You've got a shoulder notch. And you can choose to put this notch in to go to the lapel. It makes a point, so I don't always put that notch in. Notch. Bring them into your seam allowance. Now you already have seam allowance in here, so cross your corners. Show yourself that you have your seam allowance already in there. It's right all over all the edges. We need to make this into a top collar, You need to draw your grain line. And we also need to label this our top collar, cut to self. And we also need to have interfacing as well, cut to interfacing. But what's going to make it a top collar is on the top edge, you need to go out 1/8 of an inch and blend it. Went up 1/8, and I blended it to 0 over here at the collar point. Down here where we have our shoulder notch, this is where we're going to sew this into our neckline, so you don't add anything down here. Now you could choose to add a little bit right here at the front. You could curve that out if you wanted to develop a little bit of a roll for that area. But this is an option. And we would cut this out, of course, as well, like all the rest of our pieces, which we haven't cut out yet. And then this forms our top collar. And we're cutting this out double. That's where we went blended to 0. Here we've added the 1/8 of an inch on the whole top edge, the outer edge. And now we've got the draft first, then we made the under collar, then we made our top collar. Always have your last name on there, and then the date. And then you could write the piece, the design description, that this is a notch collar jacket, etc. We have our shoulder notch, and that is our notch collar. This is Annette Julie, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.